good evening to all of you. Thank you so much for making it and spending your Thursday evening with us. This is my first live event after the pandemic, so it's really nice to see people and not do this on Zoom.
Indeed,
So
yeah.
I'm really happy to be here. We're going to be, of course, in conversation with Vivan, who's written a book on a group of people who I think are very unnecessarily vilified. Those millennials, everything from the state of politics and how we are today, or climate change, or anything. It's a cliche to just blame the millennials for everything. But I'm a millennial supporter. I am a millennial, so are you.
I just made it,
You just made
1995.
it.
Yeah.
So you're team millennial.
Yep. But I just made it, so really happy to be here.
Okay. So this book is actually a very interesting exploration at trying to understand the aspirations and anxieties of the Indian millennial. A Business Insider report says that we're 400 million in India. So that's a sizable chunk of people. The book is an attempt to really not judge, but try and understand the motivations of this large chunk of people that are pretty much going to define where India is going and even maybe where India is today. So, Vivan, first up, why did you choose to write this book? Why millennials and why millennials in India?
So, we just discussed Indian millennials are more than 400 million. They're actually 440 million people. That's more than the entire population of the US and Canada combined. India's median age is of 28, and we have more working age people in this country than anywhere in the world. But my view or my understanding was that we know very little about this generation. I was 22, I was working at a think tank, and it was a really interesting job. I got to rub shoulders with some really influential people. But I felt that there's a fundamental mismatch or a gap between the people we were trying to make policies for and the country that exists outside of Delhi and Mumbai. I came upon this realization on a trip to my grandparents' house. They live in Bhopal. And every time I used to visit Bhopal, it was just I was visiting my grandparents. I didn't really think a lot about my time there. But my grandmother was telling me about this her mailman, the courier. And she was like, he's your age and he has a BTech in engineering. And I was like, wow, I mean, why does a mailman have a BTech? And I just started talking to him, and he was my age. He had a wife, he had 2 children, and his life was just so different in so many different ways. And I went back and I started looking up statistics, and I started up looking at different figures, and I really felt like we weren't talking about this generation. And millennials and India's youth are India's future. But how much do we know about this future, and how well do we understand this future? Again, being 22, I didn't have a lot of responsibilities at the time. So I said, if there's any one point in my life where I can take a risk, if I can, quit my job and, this might not lead to anything, it is now. So that's what I did. And I camped out in these small towns and cities, across India, very far from Delhi.
How many towns did you cover for the book approximately? You did 900 interviews.
I did 900 interviews. I probably, places where I really spent a lot of time were about 15, 16 small towns. And I tried to divide them, equally across the 4 regions of India. Places like Calicut, places like Mysore, Cochin, Kottayam in South India, Jabalpur, Jaipur, Bhopal, Indore, so really all over the country. And my question was, what is the millennial life like over here?
Okay.
What type of jobs do people want? Are they able to get them? What are their social views? What are their views towards marriage, towards gender, religion, and towards consumption? And finally, how do they vote? And why do they vote that way?
So one of my problems with the term millennial is that it's really wide, in the sense that we define it as anyone born between 81 and 96, right? So that's
15 years.
Yeah. So that's basically anyone from 26 to 40, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah.
Or 36.
Yeah.
So it's a huge, I don't know how much a 25-year-old would have in common with a 40-year-old. but that's the age group that you're looking at. Did you narrow this? Did you narrow your focus for your book? One. And how did you go about choosing your protagonist? Because in a country like India with such diverse like languages, ethnic diversities, linguistic diversities, caste, class, religious diversity, how did you choose who your millennials will be? Who will tell the story of the Indian millennial?
So, at first, to be honest, I had no idea what I was doing at first. So I just went out to, I think my first real big trip was Mysore. And I just started, approaching, I was like, where am I going to find young Indians over here? And well, there was the Infosys campus where I had gone for more structured interviews. But then I was like, where am I going to find people who don't have this, fancy job? And so I went to a food market, and it was near a coaching center, and there were just lots of young people over there. And I just started, I just approached groups. It was important to approach groups so that, no one feels threatened. And I just started talking to people who then were super friendly. We had a 5-minute conversation, became a 15-minute conversation. And some people, even took me back to their homes to really, so I could see their lives. In a lot of ways, I tried to really approach a cross-section of young people where they were. So in North India, when I was there, a lot of my interviewing was at town squares, at food markets, outside coaching centers once again. And then in South India, it was near places of worship and places of employment. And I would, whenever I was in a new city, I would often tweet about it. And sometimes someone on Twitter would reply to me and they'd say, hey, I'm from here. Let's get coffee or something like that. And then through them, I met other people, and then I met other people, and they're like, "Oh, you should come back to my house and meet my brother. He's doing this."
But when you're meeting a bunch of people, I'm guessing you're doing a lot of interviews. But there's, this one person that strikes, and then you want to, talk more about that character, and you feel like, okay, this character is probably telling the story of Indian millennials in a very broad way. So, do you have any characters like that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of them. So in the book, I look at two main sources of information to provide the biography that I've written. And one is a data set, which is, numbers and statistics collected by the Center for the Study of Developing Societies. It's a think tank. But then there are the anecdotes and the stories of the people I met who I share. And in a lot of ways, I found, very, these are not angry people. These are not sad people. They're just, regular young Indians who had interesting stories to share. In the book, I write about a survivor of domestic abuse who opened her own beauty salon just through looking at videos on YouTube, makeup tutorials. And I found her story to be really interesting.
Where
because
was this?
this was in Hyderabad. And, I found her story to be a uniquely millennial story, because here's a woman who, she was married off at a young age, moved to Qatar with her husband. And the domestic abuse started, and then she left. She fled with the help of the Indian embassy, came back to Hyderabad, realized she's pregnant, and just started watching YouTube videos all day, and those were makeup tutorials. And she realized she's had her child now, and she realized, well, there's one thing I'm really good at, and that's makeup. And so she just started doing it for girls in her neighborhood. And then that became bridal makeup. And then she realized, okay, like a lot of people want me and I don't have enough time, so let me hire someone. And then she's like, I need more space. So she opened her own salon, and she was finding clients on Instagram and WhatsApp. And she's in the book because she's someone who, again, her story might not have existed 20 years ago. We might not have ever, seen someone from the experiences she's had break out of them and start her own business, which is a successful business. So she's one protagonist, but then there's also Uber drivers, and there's snack stall owners, and there's other people who just have regular jobs, or they might be unemployed. Some are UPSC aspirants who reflect the trends that the data we had provide. And so for every anecdote in the book, it only serves to illustrate data or trends which describe the generation as a whole.
What are some of the key trends or key themes that you noticed while speaking to this cross section of people?
So the book, it's divided into 4 sections, which are the 4 main trends or the themes that I noticed. While there's a lot of hope and incredible aspiration in India, there's also a lot of anxiety. And so if you were
About, like, what are the key?
the anxiety, it mainly stems, it's economic anxiety. And that's sort of the thread. Jobs, exactly. And that's sort of the needle that ties all of these different threads together. So the first major finding, I guess, is that in India, we have an education system that in many ways is a filtering system. We're filtering kids and students towards better opportunities and towards the IITs or the medical colleges. But what happens is there's only a certain number of good medical colleges or IITs. And so you have almost 80 or 90% of this population that hasn't made it there. And what are those people to do now? And many of these people have invested a lot of time and a lot of money, their family's land, in acquiring this education that is not actually the escape out of the original circumstances that they thought it would be. The second sort of big finding, which is again related, is that there is a lot of economic insecurity and anxiety in big parts of India, including in big cities. And
I just want to interrupt you there and ask you that, did you notice a gender divide in this? Did you think that the men you were interviewing were more anxious about their economic prospects, job prospects than women? Or do you think women today too are equally anxious to sort of get a job or have ambitious sort of anxieties around their ambitions?
I think it would be almost equal, which in a lot of ways is a sign of our progress, right? That we have so many young women who are also anxious about their futures and have not, it's not the same old story in a lot of ways that's playing out. But that this is a very real economic anxiety, and it does not just exist with one socioeconomic group, but across all. And there's just, we've had, the economy has grown a lot in the last 20, 30 years, but jobs have not grown. There's data from the Indian Council for Economic Research that found that between 2000 and 2015, the Indian manufacturing sector added 6 million jobs. But out of those 6 million jobs, only 50% or less than 50% were actual formal jobs. So the rest of them were people could be fired whenever and they have no benefits. But even the fact that it's only 6 million jobs and the population has completely mushroomed in that time period, right? So we've added more people to the workforce than we've been able to create jobs for. Similarly, there's a sense.
Is the government job still the most coveted? Like, is that the still? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, everyone, right now wants a government job, and this is not just people who want a UPSC job, but there's people who want, all types of government jobs, including, peon level positions that I don't know if, folks in the audience remember, there was this high profile story that first came out in the Times of India and then I think the Washington Post, where there was an incident in UP where 19 million people had applied for 63,000 jobs, peon level jobs. And many of those people had PhDs, many of those people had MBAs, many of them were lawyers. And they wanted this government job because it's a stable job. It's a job for life, and it provides them with stability in a very unstable and volatile world. And there's, the power of that is, it sets you up for life.
So apart from, so okay, so you said economic anxieties, job, that's one of the key themes. What else? I mean, what I'm also trying to understand is that when you interview 900 people and when you're looking at such a diverse, sort of set of people, did you ever have a moment while writing the book that, oh wow, there's this one thing that connects, someone in rural Uttar Pradesh to someone in Bangalore to someone in Arunachal? I mean, like one thread that kind of just resonated again and again when you spoke to different people?
So there definitely are a few of them. The most common one, which I guess again is a lot of ways is a sign of the progress India has made. But how that progress has not been even is that many young people today feel that, we have pakka houses, we have bathrooms, we have electricity, but we may not be able to provide our children a better life than what we had or what our parents provided us.
Really?
Yes. And because the progress India has made since independence, but particularly in the last 20 years in terms of alleviating absolute poverty, have been quite incredible. But in the next step and solidifying the gains of that next step is not something that everyone feels that they are able to provide their children with right now. Because, earlier you had that one plot of land that had to feed 5 children. Now, each of those 5 children have had about 2 or 3 children of their own. That one plot of land can no longer provide food for 15 to 20 people anymore.
Okay.
So you've sold that land and now you have a house, but where do you go from there? And so this is sort of a thread that I found no matter where I was in India, that this was, something that kept repeating itself.
So the fear of being stagnant, that you're going to be here and maybe stuck in your social position and not be able to move ahead.
Exactly.
Now, recent Pew Research, let's move from economics and jobs to personal relationships or outlook towards marriages. Recent Pew Research, I think, said that most Indians want arranged marriages or go for arranged marriages. Most Indians across religions feel that you should marry within the community, within the religion, and within caste too. What have your conversations been like with women specifically? I'm more keen on knowing what women have to say about choosing a life partner, whether they think that it is easier for them to marry someone from within their community, or has that changed?
So one of the big developments in the arranged marriage institution has been that it's no longer as strict as it used to be many decades
It's like
ago.
a dating thing now.
It's like we're going to
It's like
set
your
you up.
parents set you up with someone.
Exactly.
But is that something that you found in like small town India also?
So I was getting there, and so that arranged marriage number is a little bit inflated because a lot of people who say, yeah, we'll have an arranged marriage are actually the type who would also have the option to say no when presented with some matches. But in a lot of places, that option does not exist. And a lot of people are entering, the similar arranged marriage that used to exist many years ago and decades ago, which is continuing to right now. And what I found is that it's not that young Indians or millennials want arranged marriages more than any other generation. It's just that, going back to the economic insecurity point, that, if you are unable to live on your own, or if you don't have the financial means to live away from your family and support yourself, then you have to abide by the decision that they've made for you. And again, this might not, represent a lot of people in our big cities anymore, but it does represent, almost 80%, 90% of the young Indians I met in the small towns and cities I was at. And it's an institution that survives because of its its links with jobs and economic security. In the book I write about this, and this is not just a thing that's one part of India. I write about a really interesting man I met in Kerala, in Cochin. and his name's Jeff. I changed his name because he asked me to, and he's a young Christian. I met him at the Government Law College in Ernakulam.
Okay.
And he was, super interesting. We spoke for almost 1.5 hours, and he was a Congress supporter, which for young, Malayalis is like being really out there because everyone there is communist. And he was telling me all about, liberalism and, all of the, and, how great Rahul Gandhi is and all of that. And then I asked him, well, Jeff, tell me, like, you're 22, 23. I think he was a bit older actually, but are you thinking about marriage? And he's like, no. I mean, that my parents are going to tell me, they are going to find a good Christian girl for me. And I said, but why is that? Like, why do you think? They're like, oh, if I don't marry, someone they've picked, they'll disown me, they'll abandon me. And he needed that, he needed their support. He needed their financial support and just their emotional support. And that's the reason why we see this number. The CSDS survey that I cite has it at 84%, but Pew has it at even higher. And it's an issue that is very much linked to economics and to the employment situation.
What about the women? Did you, what are your conversations about this with women? Because, I mean, with men, it's still been easier, one would say, when it came to choosing your partner. But with women, there has been this sort of it's changed a lot now, but when you interviews with women, what were their attitudes towards arranged marriage or having their parents choose it? Or is there an aspiration to, I'm going to choose my own partner?
I would say it's that there's no aspiration because it's just not a part of life, right? It's like...
It's not a concern.
It's not a concern.
It's just something that happens to you at a certain age when you're of marriageable age and someone chooses and that's it.
Exactly. I mean, it's, not having an arranged marriage is in many ways like me building a house on the moon. It's just not something that is going to happen.
Primary concern.
Exactly. So it's how do you navigate the system that exists and how do you find the best match within that. I write about this really interesting young lady I met in Jaipur, and she comes from a very middle class family and her parents are both doctors, and she was going to have an arranged marriage, and because her sister had actually had a love marriage which didn't work out super well, and so she said, oh, I'm of course going to have an arranged marriage. And then she started, at first she was like more positive and optimistic about it. But then as she opened up to me and we met over a few different visits, it had really, her views had changed. But it was something that, she was committed to. And she was like, this is, I'm going to make this work. And this is what I'm going to do.
There's just so much influence with Bollywood movies, with like pop culture. And there's... it's really changed in terms of how our society, even in smaller towns, smaller cities, has changed in terms of accepting love, even for people from within. So, did you come across any stories which made you feel like, wow, okay, here's like a clear shift in pattern? Or no? Or you think it's just not a concern? It's just one more thing that someone, it's just another part of life and they accept with whatever.
I think that would better be answered by someone who was also talking to young Indians 30 years ago, because I can't judge for how attitudes have shifted. What I did find is that Bollywood does not represent India at all.
But it influences a lot of Indians.
It does, and it does because it's escapist, right? Like you might not exactly be able to experience some of these things, but you love the fact that someone else is. And that's, in many ways, that's kind of why I wrote this book, because I felt that Bollywood and the traditional media, in a lot of sense, definitely not news laundry, but the establishment, as you may call it, did not understand this country and were not reflecting actual life in this country. And that's kind of why I began this project. But yeah, to answer your question, Bollywood movies do not reflect reality.
So the choice of partner then is, like you said, it's contingent again a lot on how secure you feel, and you need a family system to support you.
Precisely.
And which is why you are likely to go with what your family chooses for you, which is why I also think that folks who do go against their families are really like heroes in my view. You hear so many cases of honor killing, you hear so many cases of couples being harassed because they've fallen in love, outside religious lines, outside caste lines. And I think those guys really are then going against a whole sort of life of being secure with their family or whatever they have to offer. I want to move on to politics. On your chapter on political attitudes, you say that through my fieldwork, I found that millennials had a big, almost pivotal role in Modi's landslide re-election and the BJP's seemingly unbreakable hold over the country's politics. And you say that Indian politics is going through a fundamental reordering and millennials are leading the charge. They're fed up with so-called Lutyens elite and are replacing the old lot with leaders who speak, look, and pray like them. So, in your interviews, was the Prime Minister a very popular figure with the young, most of the people that you met?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, he is incredibly popular among young Indians right now.
And what explains his popularity? What are the things that really click for the young when they speak about Modi?
He's just such an aspirational person. I mean, his life and his story is one of incredible aspiration. That, as the story goes, his dad was a tea seller, and he rose up. He did the work, and he rose up to becoming the prime minister. And key to his story are many. The fact that he came up as a Hindi-speaking politician. And he, in many ways gave the finger to the elites that you can succeed even if you are not well connected, even if you were not born into privilege, and even if you do not speak English. And, English in particular is one of those really sensitive flashpoints in
That's what I
small
want to
town
come
India.
to. So please continue on that. But also just a quick question. Is English still a big aspiration for many Indians that you met, like learning English, being able to speak English, or has that changed with Modi?
It's a big aspiration, and English language institutes are one of the biggest industries, I'd call it, in India today. English language institutes and finishing schools. But in a lot of ways, it's also a very coded symbol of class, as who was born with knowledge of English or the mastery of it and who wasn't, and how initially so many opportunities, including political opportunities, were reserved for those who spoke good English. And going back to Modi, that's where his appeal comes from, right? That this guy, he speaks Hindi on the world stage, and world leaders have to listen to him. And if he can do it, so can I. If he made it, so can I. And that's where his appeal is. So, he speaks like most millennials. Now, he doesn't look like them naturally. He's much older, but if you look at his pictures, he's very well dressed, and he sort of retired the traditional uniform that most Indian politicians have had to wear, which is the white kurta and pajama, for these, really colorful, well-made, clothes. And a lot of young Indians are like, yes, he's a well-dressed person, and we want to be like that. And
so what other qualities apart from, rags to riches stories? I mean, not riches, but success. Basically someone who rose from nowhere and rose to success. So what other qualities of the Prime Minister, and which other political leader comes close to popularity? Is Rahul Gandhi anywhere close?
I mean, at this point, he's a complete non-entity.
Okay. Among the young, there's no resonance,
Indians.
except for
Yes.
the one poor boy you met in Kerala,
Except for Jeff,
who's a Congress worker.
Yes.
So which other leader is popular?
So just going to Modi and then his attributes that other leaders have is that Indians, by and large, don't want to get a beer with their prime minister the way an American wants to get a beer with their president. In many parts of India, Indians fear their leader and they love them for it. That, you know, this person is a strong man, and they are going to keep us safe. They are going to provide us benefits. They are going to, you know, get the government scheme paid out to us. They are going to build, you know, the harvesting system or the street light. And Modi has sort of understood that, but he's taken it one step further, along with other politicians who have similar appeal, who I'll name as well. And he's understood that young Indians and millennials in particular, because there is this economic instability, that they crave someone who offers them that stability. So he's in many ways a guardian. And I use this word because I heard it in MP, where I was before the Lok Sabha elections. People said, "Wo to hamare guardian hai." Another reporter who I was talking to after the elections at the Indian Express, one of the editors there, said that she heard people call him Pita because he had this, you
News
know.
anchors also call him
Exactly.
India ke papa.
Because in a lot of ways that he was this person who would provide them with stability in an otherwise unstable world. If you remember, almost all senior BJP leaders had changed their Twitter handles in 2019 to Chaukidar. Chaukidar Narendra Modi, Chaukidar Amit Shah, Chaukidar Sushma Swaraj. And while that was in response to what happened in Kashmir, it was also that I am going to protect you from everything in your life. And that's not just Pakistan, but it's all of these other challenges that you're facing. Now, who are the other people who have those attributes in the political arena right now? Mamta Banerjee, who did exceedingly well in Bengal. I mean, I was there before the election, and the arsenal that had been deployed was, you know, something else. But she came out on top because she understood this appeal. First, she was Didi, right? Didi is the elder sister who also protects you. But then she realized, hey, something else is going on over here. Let me ask for protection, which, you know, a lot of people would then want to give. And she became Bengal ki beti. You know, this overnight sort of transformation, which all, you know, blends into that one, you know, desire for protection in a lot of ways. And then Arvind Kejriwal, who is also, you know, both of these people, they came up from the streets. They understand street politics, and they really talk about issues that young people care about.
But young people across India, or did you feel like, okay, Arvind Kejriwal is like popular in Delhi and Mamta is popular in Bengal, but did you find like a resonance, like Modi probably has a pan-Indian appeal? Did these guys also have appeal in places other than the states that they govern in?
No, not at all. I mean, they are...
So it's restricted to Delhi and West Bengal.
Absolutely.
But pan-India, you'd hear Modi, like the appeal of Modi would surpass any other leader.
Exactly, and that's because in a lot of states and nationally there is no, I mean, Rahul Gandhi does not provide that appeal, and there's no one else really who does. But in some states you do have other leaders who do, like, right, in Andhra Pradesh, Jagan has similar appeal. In Chhattisgarh, Bhupesh Baghel has similar appeal. He's also come up from, you know, street politics. And then a lot of states, you know, nobody has that appeal. You know, in MP, no one has that appeal. So it's just sort of Modi who provides that. In Karnataka, nobody has that appeal, you know, again, so that comes sort of from whatever's happening in national politics. But yeah, it's definitely something that's linked to, you know, I am going to protect you and keep you safe in an otherwise unstable world.
So I'm just going to ask my last question and then we'll open it up for the audience, because you spoke so much about appeal and the protector image. And it's quite amazing because I've had similar experiences while reporting on elections. And sometimes when I hear people talk, it's almost like, to me, because I also consume a lot of television news, it's almost like a TV anchor speaking to me. You know, that at least Pakistan is scared of us, China is scared of us, Modi showed him, you know, their place. And a lot of people who support Modi almost talk like news anchors. And I was wondering, when you were reporting and doing your field interviews, how much influence does media and news media especially have on people? Where are millennials consuming their news from? Is it from the big television news channels or like Facebook, or what is their information source? And are there stars like in the news world for, I don't know if that's something that you even asked people, but just curious.
I mean, it's so on brand for a news laundry editor to ask this question, and it is extremely relevant, right? Where are young Indians and Indians getting their news from? And this is a question that sort of people around the world are grappling with about news and facts and information. Well, to start off, nobody watches TV news anymore, and I mean the data anyway can't be trusted. But where the real numbers are the Facebook pages, and everyone is getting their news from these Facebook pages and allied WhatsApp groups. That there's a full information ecosystem that exists out there. So a lot of these pages they're only Facebook pages. They don't even have websites, and they generate this amazing meme content. And these memes and short videos are super popular. And they're circulated among young Indians. Now, once again, this question does have a political link to it, because this information or this news has been weaponized for political benefit. So I have seen videos where there will be a politician from the opposition speaking, and then it's been morphed with a video from Pakistan or an Arab country that look, they're cheering when this politician is talking. Or then, I think, Manisha, you might know this video. It's a famous one. It's called the Aloo Ki Factory, the Sone Ki Factory, Rahul Gandhi, where somewhere he was actually critiquing Modi, and they sort of took some of those comments and scrubbed the rest out, and they said that he's talking ke aloo daloge or sona niklega, which is not what he said, but it was edited in a way that it made it look like that's what he said. And that is news. That's not Facebook content, it's news for a lot of people.
Consumed with the trust that a news brand will have.
Exactly. And then in my book, I actually open it with the story of Ravindra, who's a really interesting millennial I met in Mumbai. And I was in his Uber, and I know it's very cliched to start a book with a conversation with an Uber driver, but it was so interesting I had to include it, even though I put it in every different chapter to see if it works there, because I did not want to start with it. But I was sitting in his Uber, and we were crossing Victoria Terminus or Shivaji Terminus, and I was just asking someone, is this what Victoria Terminus used to be? And he's like, yeah, it is. And then he started talking to me about Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and Jinnah. And he kept referring to Jinnah as a female, as a woman. And I was like, oh, what's going on? Because he thought that Jinnah was Gandhi's wife. And that Gandhi and Jinnah had conspired together to break India and Pakistan into these two separate countries. And the thinking was that Gandhi would rule India and Jinnah would rule Pakistan. And then he thought Indira Gandhi was Mahatma's daughter, right? Because it's the same line of thought.
So the conspiracy, I know, but I've never heard of Gandhi Jinnah being like
let me just, give me 30 seconds to, and he thought that Indira Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi had basically plundered India to build Italy. And that everything in Italy was, taken from here in the last, whenever Indira Gandhi was prime minister. And I was like, wow, like this is all news to me. I didn't know any of this. Like, where did you hear this? And he's like, hame to WhatsApp pe mila tha. And we all know this, right? We all know what goes around on WhatsApp. We all get the good morning messages. But this is also a part of what's happening on WhatsApp in small town in India and in big cities as well. That people are getting their news and their information from there without it being from an actual organization. Not that you can trust many of the news organizations in India today, but that's what's going on. And that's where everyone has a smartphone now, or I mean at least 650 million people do, and data is super cheap, right? So you can consume videos endlessly, and you can consume any types of videos, and that's sort of where a majority of people are getting their news from nowadays.
Great. We're going to open up to the audience, so please, if anyone has any questions.
Hi.
Yes.
So I I had two questions. One was if you could just talk a little about your findings about the relationship that millennials have with religion. You know, what are some of the conversations you've had? Also, their understanding of caste, especially with, how news has been in the last few years. And another thing I was hoping you could maybe talk about is do millennials have a lot of aspirations about moving abroad anymore? Because I remember growing up in the 90s and the 2000s, and it was everybody's greatest aim was to move to the US or to move to Canada. And I know people do, people maybe have the same aspirations, but not with the same sort of madness. So, some of your conversations, what did they reflect?
So just to summarize, religion, caste, and living abroad. Okay. So religion, I found that millennials they say they're religious, but they don't go to a temple or they don't go to a mosque or a church. But they say they're very religious, and they claim that religion guides their lives. And what I've found and what I heard in my interviews and I inferred is that in a lot of ways, religion provides you with an identity that being secular cannot provide you with. That you can say, I'm a proud Hindu, or I'm a proud Muslim, or I'm a proud Christian, but nobody really says I'm a proud secular person, or I'm a proud atheist. And in a lot of communities now where people do not have jobs, or where they do not have a lot of stability, the religion provides them with that stability. I just want to share an anecdote of a young woman I met with you, not super far from here. I'm not going to name the place or the sect she was a member of. We had to take her out of the book for different reasons, but she's a member of a sect, a religious sect that made the news a few years ago when the authorities raided it because the leader was, there were a lot of complaints against him. And I asked her, why were you a member of this cult, of this group? And she said, the ashram was the only place where I felt truly safe. And the ashram is the only place where I was able to move freely. Because in my village, I wasn't able to really go out after a certain time. And, I was always being questioned who I was hanging out with. But when I'm at the ashram, main to ashram ja rahi hu, and she can do whatever she wants at the ashram. And she can have these really valuable and meaningful interactions with other people her age, with other men and women her age at the ashram. So she was able to get this, community simply because she was a member of this, religious or spiritual group. About caste, I don't remember your exact question, but caste is, and I say this in the book, I have a full chapter on it. I write that caste is still very much in the air we breathe. It might not be in certain areas of Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, but that's because those are generally higher caste and areas to begin with. So everyone is of a homogeneous background. But in small town India and even in bigger cities, but different neighborhoods, people are extremely caste aware, and they know main to ye hu, wo to wo hai, and even in many neighborhoods, a certain caste group lives in one part of that neighborhood or in one part of the dwelling, and everyone knows who they are. Definitely in small town India, it's a part of the air people breathe, and why is that? That's because very much caste still determines the profession you have. I write about someone I met who was from the Nai caste, and he was the first person, a millennial, to not be a Nai, to not be a barber, and he was an engineer, and he's actually the courier I was talking about. But it's definitely very much a part of millennial life in India right now. And then finally, about
I think even in big cities.
even in
I
big
think the
cities,
awareness
even in
is-
big
yeah,
cities.
it's just-
And then finally, about living abroad, Absolutely not. I mean, most millennials, most young Indians very much see themselves as living where they were born and where they've grown up. Even internal migration in India, it's high. It's obviously high, but it's internal. And what I found, which I found this interesting, to be honest with you, is that in Kerala, for example, all of the laborers are from Odisha or Bengal. In Andhra Pradesh, they're all from Odisha, and then in Odisha, they're all from Jharkhand and Bengal. So there's a lot of internal migration, and then most Malayalis are then in the Gulf, right, in the Gulf. And so that's probably the only state, Kerala and Punjab, where you have a lot of youth leaving the country. And those are because traditionally they've been wealthier states. But for everyone else, it's very much we are going to be in India. And I do want to mention that while people might not be optimistic about their own lives, they're very optimistic about India and the future of the country. And they're very bullish that this is where they are going to succeed, even if they're not successful currently.
Hi, Vivan, do you want to say more about any of the interesting interviews or experiences you'd had in Bhopal or Madhya Pradesh, given that it was like your tier two city base where some of your family lives, and you were there, I think, during the 2018 assembly election campaign as well. So like anything interesting that you remember from that experience?
Well, thanks for that question. I mean, I had one of the greatest joys of writing this book with the trips that I was taking outside of Delhi, and I got to meet some really incredible people and politicians. And I was in Madhya Pradesh during the 2018 state assembly elections, and I was in Jabalpur, and I was. I had spent the whole day, at different markets talking to young people, and then I heard there was a rally or a roadshow type of situation in a more rural part of town, and it was a BJP candidate, and so I landed up there, and I was like, this is a big area. How the hell do I find these people? How do I, how will I find the candidate, and how do I approach him? And so I'm walking around, and then I hear the drums, the dholki, and it's getting louder and louder and louder. And then I stumble upon this band of dholkis, and there's this candidate, over there, this BJP candidate who was a Sardar. And a lot of people don't know this, but Jabalpur has a big Sikh population that was, came in from Pakistan. And I just approached the candidate, and he's a really, he was called Natkhat. And I tell him, मैं Delhi se patrakar, आया हूँ, because otherwise no one understands. I mean, you have to sort of change your identity a little bit.
No one understands author.
Yeah, nobody understands author.
Lekhak?
Exactly.
Ye kaun hai?
And so he thought I was with like a big magazine, and I was there to cover him. And so he gives me a big hug, a big sweaty hug, and he takes the malas off of him. And, that's really when I realized, like, and just that trip in general, I was just meeting these people who I'd met, 15 minutes earlier, and then next thing I'm in their living room, drinking chai. And it was one of those trips that really made me so appreciate life in India, and that there's so much richness to these interactions, and the stories you hear, spending time in these places, and that's what and those are the stories I tell in my book.
Okay, so the process you followed to write the book is you had the data with you, and then you went around to find examples to correlate with the data that you had. So what are the unusual examples you have that do not correlate with the data that we see?
Thanks for the question. So yes, almost all the examples serve to illustrate trends that exist in the data that's out there. The examples on entrepreneurship, and I have a chapter on how technology has made millennial entrepreneurs, is not reflective of the data. And I'll tell you why, because the data tell us that 65% of young Indians want a government job. And then after that, 19% want their own businesses. But even that 19%, when you say want your own business, it doesn't mean that I'm going to start Ola or Oyo. It means that I want my own Kirana shop, or I want my own, warehouse type. So it's not the way we think about your own business as being possibly a startup or something like that. And the examples, once again, I use of Nazneen, whose name has once again been changed to protect her identity, is, she is only one person who I met, out of a lot of other people whose businesses had failed and who hadn't made it. But I still found her story was so interesting and it was so unique to this generation that I had to share it, even though it was not actually totally reflective of the data. And so I only do those in the book because I believe that those are stories we wouldn't have seen earlier, but they are not reflective of millennials as a whole.
So, Vivan, firstly, congratulations on your book.
Thank you.
I had 2-3 questions on this. One was, when you met these people, how did they relate their future with India's current prosperity in some ways, and also the disparity that exists? And how did they see their future, therefore? Were they optimistic about that, or, they were still pessimistic about what future had in store for them? The second one is, I see a lot of millennials today who are coming from, say, tier 2, tier 3 cities, who've done their engineering or whatever, who are just jumping into entrepreneurship, who are, putting up, starting their own startups. And there's so many of them coming up. So what is it that drives them? Because, if you go back to the other generations behind them, from the generation I come and some even after me, people would stick to, a job. So you came out of college, maybe you did a professional degree, and then you got into a job. You would never think of getting into being an entrepreneur, not taking any salary, not knowing what future held for you tomorrow. And yet, there are so many of these millennials who are willing to do that. So that is one. And the third is, if you look at family systems, particularly again, tier 2, tier 3 cities, very strong, at least they used to be. But are the youth of today, are they also now in these smaller towns looking at nuclear families and moving out of their secure environment? Only if, obviously, like you said, if they have an economic compulsion, then they're forced to stay back. They're forced to marry according to the parents' wishes. But if that were not so, how do you see them, changing in that aspect?
So
Lot to unpack.
No, a lot to unpack. The first question is something I've thought about a lot, and I try to write about it thoughtfully in the book as well. Is that how do you correlate India's macroeconomic successes since liberalization with actual reality and with the lives of Indian millennials? And I've written about this outside of the book as well. Is that there's an understanding of liberalization in India as being this uniquely transformative event that just completely changed life. And in a lot of ways that is true, like where we're right at right now, Gurgaon in a lot of ways is a huge beneficiary of liberalization and the services boom, right? But what happened is that the services sector grew, but we didn't actually have a manufacturing sector that grew with it. So people who were well positioned in the 1990s to take advantage of that took advantage of it. And a lot of that money that came in financial services and in IT built a lot of suburbs and new cities in India, but then that was the extent of it. In 1996, Narasimha Rao lost the election after liberalizing the economy. In 2004, Atal Bihari Vajpayee lost his election, even though India had done very well macroeconomically and in terms of investment, because nobody actually felt that investment had changed their lives. Nobody really felt that these macroeconomic successes were, improving their lives. And in a lot of ways, millennials are feeling that right now, that, India is trying to become a $5 trillion economy. And in terms of our fundamentals, we're growing at 6 to 8%, maybe 9% in a good year every year. But we're also experiencing this phenomenon called jobless growth, where growth is happening, but jobs are not keeping up with that growth. And also that we are adding many more people to the workforce than, once again, we're creating jobs. So there's this huge mismatch between where the money is going and where the people are living. And the money is coming into places like this and in Bangalore and in Mumbai and Hyderabad, but it's not evenly spread out across India. And that sort of, bleeds into, I think, your second question, which
Entrepreneurs, like people wanting to
entrepreneurs,
become-
yes. And in the book, I actually write about people like you mentioned, Bhavesh Agarwal at Ola. He had a great job with Microsoft. So he was at IIT, and then he had a job at Microsoft. And then he told his dad, I'm thinking about starting this company. And his dad says, you went to IIT to start a taxi company? And I mean, look at Ola today. He's in electric vehicles, and I think they sold 600 million worth of scooters just today itself. And he's someone, but he was well positioned to take advantage of those opportunities, because he had this idea, he had a great education, he had the drive within him to do it. There's a whole lot, there's a lot of people who are not able to, make that jump. And there's this adage in India that you become an engineer first and then you figure out what to do with your life. And in a lot of ways, we should be encouraging those risk takers who want to start their own businesses, because otherwise you could just take the easy way out and, join the government, like I met a lot of engineers who were doing. Or you could, take the risk like Bhavesh did, or Ritesh Agarwal, who's not an engineer, but he's also done extremely well for himself. And his idea is, a unique idea. It's not even like someone else was already doing that. There are a lot of, sorry, were you going to say something?
No, go ahead.
There's a lot of entrepreneurship, taking place in small town India right now. And a lot of startups you're seeing in places like Cochin, for example, even Jaipur and Indore. A lot of startups are coming over there, and they're trying to solve local problems. And I think that's, hopefully some of those start taking off, because that'll be really awesome for our growth story. And then the final
sorry.
question. I keep,
No,
and then,
I am trying to button, but no, go ahead.
but
Finish your point.
would you also mind restating your final question?
The final one was about family systems, and how is that changing in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities where you're looking at nuclear families, or it continues to stay as it was earlier?
So one of the questions I asked in almost every interview I did was, who do you live with? And I would say about 70% of the people I met, of the 900 people I spoke to, lived in large families or joint families. And so this is not, these are not big houses or anything like that, but it's just that, the grandparents live there, the parents live there. There might be, a dad's brother with his family who also lives there. And that's because, a lot of people are still connected to their farms. And that's also why formal employment is not a big construct in many parts of India, is because you might not be needed on the farm all the time, but you are needed at some times of the year. And so a lot of people, millennials do largely live in these big families, but I have also met a lot of people who, as they have their own jobs and they get their own wealth, have moved out and they're living on their own. But I would say that's a very, very small minority. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys, for being
Thank you, everyone.
And such a lovely audience.
The subscription model is something that keeps News Laundry afloat, but we need hundreds of thousands of people to completely transform the news ecosystem. So you pay for news, so it serves you. So click on the link with this video, subscribe to News Laundry and pay to keep news free, और गर्व से कहो, मेरे खर्च पर आज़ाद है खबरें.